Moolala is brought to you by the nonprofit credit counseling agency Credit Canada. I was doing that thing when you scroll mindlessly through Twitter, as you do, scrolling, and I came across this thread, quote, "Make sure you know what you're retiring to do." This was a hard post to write. I almost didn't write it, in fact. I've started and trashed this story many times, but I believe there are important lessons in this story we can learn from. Warning, this story does not have a happy ending. The post was by Mark McGrath, a certified financial planner at Wellington Altus Private Wealth, and it is a story about his dad. He's in Squamish, British Columbia. Hello there.
Hey, Bruce.
This is a hard thread to read. I can only imagine how hard a thread it was for you to write. I want to start first with who your dad was at the peak of his life.
Yeah, great question. He was many things. Primarily, he was a good father, of course, and he went through a lot growing up. He was very disciplined. He was an excellent golfer. At one point, he was a scratch golfer. In fact, tried to get me into golf very early, and I rebelled hard. I still hate golf to this day, and I think it's because he forced me to play it.
Right.
But he was a businessman, and so he knew that golf may be important to me later on if I sort of followed in his footsteps. But he was a black belt in karate, and I think that's where a lot of his discipline came from. He used to do push-ups on his index finger, even into his 50s, just to kind of remind us, I think, of who the boss was in our household. And he was a businessman. He ran a tile store, and he had done that for decades, and he did it very well. He was quite successful. I don't know that he loved tile, but he liked being that person. He liked being a businessman.
Was he an extrovert? Did he love the people side of it?
I think he did. Yeah, he was very social. He liked the business side of it. It was a small tile store, so there was only a handful of employees. So he'd go to the shop on most days. It was him and one or two other guys that were his employees. But I think he liked, the waves of traffic, the people coming through and talking to people. He was quite social outside of his business as well. So he was close friends with the guys that he worked with, and obviously many others. So he spent time on the weekends out and about, and just socializing.
And then what changed?
So retirement is the singular event that I can think of that really led to this. He worked hard. He didn't work, 60, 80 hours a week or anything like that. He was still disciplined with his schedule, but he worked towards retirement as maybe a singular goal. So he saw his business as a means to an end. As I mentioned, I don't think tile was, a passion of his, but developing something that he could turn into a financial asset that would allow him the financial flexibility to retire. I think that was really, really his focus. And when he was 58 years old, he sold his business. And my family and I, my brother, my mom, I don't think we knew that he was even in the market to sell his business. Like, he was very private, and he didn't really talk about his finances or anything like that with us. And just one day we were out for dinner at, just some pub, nothing fancy. And we were, I think I was eating hot wings, having a beer with him. And he said, "Well, I sold the business." And we kind of just, we were taken aback, right? It was just, lightning strike. Like, what do you mean you sold the tile shop? Wow. And he's like, "Yeah, I stress tested it, 8 ways from Sunday, and I can't fail. I've got the capital. I'm done. I'm exiting the business." And so we were thrilled. We were excited for him. That's really what he'd worked so hard to achieve. And within he booked a trip to Asia. He was a huge fan of the Asian people. He used to read books about the Okinawans in Japan and their longevity and the number of centenarians that came from there. And so he booked a trip. He'd been there many times, but he booked a big long trip as a celebration, a reward to himself for retirement. And he came back a couple of months later, and within a few weeks of that, I believe, he was back working for the guys that he sold his business to. And of course, this was not a financial decision. It was a social one. He just wanted to be back with his buddies at the shop, I think. And he was just doing it a couple of days a week. And it just didn't, I think his sense of belonging or his sense of purpose at the shop had changed. He wasn't the boss anymore. It wasn't his shop anymore. And so he didn't do that for too long.
What did you notice first about a change in his mental health?
Yeah, it's tough to put a finger on exactly what it was. It was relatively slow, and to be honest, I think maybe some of the warning signs didn't jump out to us at first. It was a kind of a culmination of smaller behavioral changes and changes in his attitude that kind of let us understand, hey, something here is going on. And for a little bit more of the backstory, he was very social. Years prior to this, my mom and him had split up. They remained very, very close, great friends, lived very close to each other. But my brother and I at the time were living more at my mom's house than my dad's. I was out, but my brother was living at home. And so when we got together, we would go to my mom's house. So I wasn't seeing him as much at that time. I was, recently married as well. And so I didn't see him as much, but my brother and my mom saw him more frequently. So they may have picked up on something that I hadn't picked up on. But he started to, just his general demeanor had changed. He was a joker. He loved to make jokes and laugh, and he was just doing less of that. And over time, a few things changed. At one point he stopped eating steak, which maybe for some people it seems like a normal dietary change. That was not the case for him. He'd been eating steak multiple times a week for his entire life. Like he would make hamburgers at home, and he would be eating the raw ground beef while he was making hamburgers. Like that's how much of a meat fanatic he was. And one day he was like, I don't like steak anymore. And so this was either a chemical or biological or physical change that I think took place, and maybe it was, a psychological one as well. But that to me was, something is up, right?
And then I'm obviously fast forwarding here in time. Then you got a phone call from an unknown number.
Yeah. So this was a Thursday night in October, and I had gone to sleep. It was around 11:30 at night. I got a private phone call, and I didn't answer it because I typically do not answer private phone calls. And they called back right away. And when I picked up the phone, they said, it's the police, it's the RCMP. You need to go and see your mom. She's very upset. And this was a strange conversation because, what do you mean my mom's upset? And at the time I was living in East Vancouver. My mom's in Richmond. So for your listeners who don't know those locations, it's about a 45-minute drive. And so I said, look, my mom's upset. I get that. I'll give her a call. And he's like, no, you got to get over there. And so I asked the officer, if I'm driving across, town in the middle of the night, I want to know what I'm doing it for. And he kind of took a breath and paused and said, your father's dead.
Unimaginable.
Yeah.
So you have had some time. This is 10 years ago that this happened. Is that right?
10 years this year. Yeah. This October.
What do you think happened?
I think his sense of purpose and his identity was wrapped up in his business, and he didn't know it. I think his goal of retiring was so important to him that I don't think he weighed enough how important that business was to him. And without it, I don't think he had enough on the other side of retirement to keep him going. I don't think he had that sense of purpose and identity that the business brought him. And I think that maybe loneliness, and I don't think it was boredom because he was very active, but I think he stripped himself of that identity by letting go of that business so abruptly.
As you say, this is the first time that you shared this story so publicly, but given what you do for a living, I can imagine that it has been in the background, perhaps every day for the last 10 years, as you work with your clients who are doing their retirement savings and they're doing all the right things to. How would you say your personal experience has informed the work that you do with your clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we don't, as financial planners, the curriculum that we follow traditionally doesn't have training in this, right? We have a lot of financial training, but we don't really have training in the psychological and emotional aspects of retirement. And so, you're right. It's been in the back of my mind. It's something I'm acutely aware of, but at the same time, it's been challenging to go out and figure out how to include these types of things in conversations with clients, right? And in reality, some clients that you work with for a long time, they become close, they become friends, and so these conversations happen more casually. But with somebody you don't know very well, it's a very difficult topic to broach. And in that Twitter thread that I wrote, there's another young advisor, And he actually sought specific training in palliative care and bereavement because he works with so many retirees. And he actually said it was one of the best things that he ever did. So I think, even myself and other advisors need to seek out additional training to have these conversations with clients.
What kind of response did you get from that Twitter thread?
It was overwhelming. I had absolutely no idea the impact that it would have on people. When I posted that story, I thought it was an interesting story. I thought people would enjoy the story and the lesson that can be learned from it, but I had no idea the reach it was going to have. And I got literally hundreds of messages in my inbox on Twitter of people who had gone through something similar, and it didn't always end the same way. Sometimes it did, but there were people who, for example, were pushing their parents to retire from their business, and they'd be pushing hard, and they wrote to me saying, now I understand why they don't want to retire, and I'm going to lay off. I'm going to stop pushing them so hard because now I can see what you're talking about in my own family, my own parents. So the response was overwhelming. Just people, it seemed to really help people, and I didn't know that it would. And that feels good, but at the same time, it's also tragic that so many people out there are going through it.
What lessons do you hope people take away from this story? And I will say, I just so admire your willingness to put it out there to the world, because I really do think it is a story that can make such a big difference, both for the kids, right? How we engage with our parents, but also for those who are at that point in life when they're considering the next chapter. What do you hope people take away?
I think it's something you need to look at earlier than you think. Even myself, for example, as a financial planner, I love what I do. I absolutely love it. I can't even consider doing anything else. And I can start to see in my own behaviors and my own work how this could easily happen to me, just in terms of my identity. I'm the money guy. Like, people come to me for money questions, and I love it. It's hugely rewarding. But I'm 39, and so for me, retirement is hopefully decades away. But even now, especially after writing it, I think taking a good hard look at your life, not just through the lens of your career, but also through the lens of your social capacity, whether it's religion or it's volunteering, that sort of social capital that you have, and what structures do you have outside of work that are really going to bring you purpose. So I think taking stock of where you are right now, regardless of where you are in your career, is a hugely important thing. And as you ramp up into retirement, seek help in this area. There are programs out there that deal with this. There are training programs that even employers can get themselves involved in to help their employees make these types of transitions. And, I don't know, a lot of people can't do this, but can you step away and do a sabbatical before retirement? Can you really test this out to find out for yourself if this is something that might affect you? I think those are important steps.
Parents, for us as parents, and for kids who have parents or had parents, we know that they leave an extraordinary imprint on us. What is something that you are grateful to your dad for?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, I am who I am today because of my parents, right? They were great parents. Yeah, I was a bit troublesome at times when I was a teenager, and they put up with me. They raised us well. They loved us unconditionally. They came to every sports game we ever had. They encouraged us. My mom's still around, and I talk to her frequently. I think they did everything that they could to ensure that we were set up for success. And I'm grateful for that. It's hard to say one thing, right? Because again, it's a culmination of everything they did to raise us. But that story stays with me, and I remember. I look back and remember fondly the times that I spent with him and some of the lessons that he taught me growing up that I still carry with me today.
Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Likewise.
Mark McGrath is a certified financial planner at Wellington Altus Private Wealth. He joined us to talk about his dad and so many lessons, such bravery in the telling, and a real, I think, call to action for all of us as we look ahead to see what we want to be doing in that next chapter and what we need to do it in a healthy and sustainable way.